Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming along tonight to this stream where I am joined by my colleague from the Cake project, Martin Björkström. So hopefully he's up in the... Oh, that's the wrong way. He's up there in the top right-hand corner of your screen. So I'll let him introduce himself, and then we will go on with some introduction stuff, and then we'll get started on what we're going to talk about tonight. So, Martin.
Yeah, hi, Martin Björkström. I'm active in the Cake community and also in the .NET community. Microsoft MVP and do stuff like OmniSharp and Cake. And did I mention Cake? And also, so yeah, that's about it.
Oh, you do a lot more than that, and we're going to come on to that with some of the stuff that you've been playing with that's wholly of interest. So, one thing I want to point out before we get started too much is Martin may need to run away at some point during tonight's stream. His family have come down, basically not very well, and he's the one person who's the holdout who's not ill yet. But if one of those family members need his help, he might need to run away. So if that happens, I have got a Martin picture that will go up there in the top right-hand corner. So he's here in spirit with us, but he might not be here in person. But for now, we do have him. So let's take advantage of it. So I'll do a quick introduction. So as most of you on the chat will know, I've now got a GitHub repository that is for all of the live streaming that I'm doing. So in here there is a rough agenda of upcoming streams, as well as links to the videos of the previous streams with some information about them all. So anything that you would like to talk about or you think I should do a stream on, then feel free to raise an issue in this repository and I will take that under advisement. The next couple of upcoming streams are going to be around the creation of a new Visual Studio Code extension. I have an idea for something I want to play with, so I'm going to take a couple of weeks in this stream just to build that up. And then the one that I'm kind of thinking on after that is looking at a chat ops system known as Poshbot that's written by a guy called Brandon Olin. I've been playing with this recently at my work, but also I've been looking at integrating Poshbot with Gitter, the chat system that we use predominantly for the projects that I work on, so the Cakes, the Chocolateys. And what I want to attempt to do with that is, one, is showcase the new Gitter backend that I've created for Poshbot, but also show how we can add a new plugin for the bot, which will allow us to automate some stuff. Now that can be automation of pretty much anything. So example ones would be there's an XKCD plugin already, so it'll run off, it'll grab a random XKCD image and it'll put it into the chat. But you can use it for so much more than that, and what I'm hoping to highlight in that stream is how we can start creating a new plugin for it. So that'll be an interesting one, I think, hopefully. But for today, what we're here to talk about and why we've got Martin on the stream is to talk about this thing called the language server protocol. So I could attempt to basically make up some words around this, but I'm going to pass over to Martin to give a brief introduction of what the language server protocol is and why we would want to use it. Okay, so hopefully that's okay, Martin. I'm just going to throw that at you.
yeah, it's okay. Basically the language server protocol is a standardized protocol on how different clients like editors, IDEs, etc., communicates with which language servers. A language server, that's basically a server which provide language-specific smarts and communicates with the development tools. And this protocol, then the language server protocol, kind of ties this clients and servers together, which basically means that you can create a server once and then use it in multiple editors like VS Code, Atom, Visual Studio, Vim, etc. So basically what we're going to do today is we're going to write a language server in C#, and then we're going to use it from Visual Studio Code.
So just before we jump to that, just to provide some clarity for some people, and I know that this is a question that I had, is people might have heard of something called OmniSharp, which, based on what you described, was my understanding of what OmniSharp is and was. So what's the difference between OmniSharp and this standardized protocol? Are they the same thing?
Yeah. OmniSharp is a language server, which to some extent also implements the language server protocol. But when you use the C# extension from Visual Studio Code, you don't communicate with OmniSharp via language server protocol. In that sense, the OmniSharp exe in that case does not speak language server protocol there. But it is possible to do it today. But not all functionality of OmniSharp is supported via language server protocol today. Okay. So basically, this is because OmniSharp was created before this language server protocol was standardized and created. So this language server protocol basically came when Microsoft started creating Visual Studio Code. It came like a side effect for this.
So is the intention then that at some point OmniSharp will fully implement the language server protocol, and the reciprocal, that the language server protocol will standardize everything that OmniSharp does? Is that where they're trying to get to?
I'm probably not the correct person to answer that, but David Driscoll, he had a dream, that we could. If we could get the language server protocol stuff in OmniSharp to play nicely, and we could support everything that the custom protocol supports today, then it would be great, because that would minimize the amount of code in the extension on the VS Code side. We could go remove lots and lots of code, but it's a long way.
Okay. So in terms of what we want to do, so if I go in here and I open up Visual Studio Code, then today in the Visual Studio Code extension for Chocolatey, so I'm just going to go up here and go to the command palette and type Choco. Then if I run the create new Chocolatey package template, so if I just call this test package, then what that extension does, or what that command does, is it generates a templated installations, all the installation scripts or all the packaging scripts that are needed for a Chocolatey package. So there's lots of stuff in there. So what I mean by that is, if I look at the test package.nuspec file, then in here there are a lot of comments, first of all, and there are a lot of things like this where the intention is that these things get replaced. So if I am a Chocolatey package maintainer, then I can use this as a starting point for creating a new package. But what happens is that when you run ChocoPack to take that new spec and all the associated files, then it creates a nutkeg. And essentially, then that nutkeg will be sent to the package validator and the package verifier. So these are the automated processes that run as part of the Chocolatey ecosystem. And I did a whole stream on all of this, so feel free to go and have a look at this. But what will happen at that point is that package validator will run a set of rules across all of the packaging scripts and all of the packaging files. And if some of those rules are not adhered to, that package validation will actually fail. So the package submission will be sent back to the maintainer, and the maintainer will have to update it. So what I would like to do, and Martin has reliably assured me that all of this is possible with this magic that is the language server protocol, is I would like to have red squiggly lines in this file that indicate when there is a problem with the file. So straight away, before running ChocoPack, I will be able to hopefully see when there is a problem and get a clear error message back that says what I have to do to correct that issue. And this is going to be done with this magic that is the language server protocol, and the coupling that with the Visual Studio Code extension for Chocolatey to bring all those things together. So that's where we're going to try to get to. We have I'm not sure how well this will go across with the different people that we have in the chat room, but we have a Blue Peter style, here's one that we made earlier that we can fall back on to kind of show it working, but the intention is to kind of start from scratch and build it up and show how all these pieces fit together. So with that in mind, I'm going to close this one, and then what we need to do is, first of all, Martin, we need a Visual Studio Code extension. We need the templated Visual Studio Code extension that will allow us to host that language server protocol, correct?
Yeah, that can do that, yes.
So what we've installed, before the stream, we installed a tool called Yeoman. So Yeoman is a scripting engine that will allow the creation of a template, and there are lots of templates that you can add. So what we added was the code generator for Visual Studio Code. So if I do at this point yo code, that just sounds great, doesn't it? So I'm going to run yo code, and that will start the Yeoman process, and it'll add all the necessary files for a Visual Studio Code extension. Nupkeg, I've been pronouncing it new package. So Gareth, it depends on what side of the fence you land on that one. Some of the original nuspec or NuGet developers, they call it a new package. I just think Nupkeg sounds great, and that's why I say it. It also annoys some of the original NuGet developers when you say Nupkeg. It just rolls off the tongue a bit easier, I think, than new package. But it really, it's up for debate. You can call it new package or you can call it Nupkeg. So the Yeoman Generator in the background here there's lots of options for things that you can create as part of this template. But we're going to pick the new extension with TypeScript as the default language. So I should hopefully be able to pick TypeScript. What's the name of your extension? We'll call this one just. This is not the actual Visual Studio Code extension code. We're going to create a new one, so we'll just call this Choco extension. Well, why not? Choco extension. The identifier is going to be Choco extension. What's the description? Doesn't really matter. We're just going to call it Bob, and we're going to initialize it with a Git repository. And then I don't actually know why you would use one over the other, so I'm just going to default to npm because that's the one that I've used the most historically. And
I have learned that you get longer coffee breaks when using npm.
So I had actually heard that. I heard that Yarn was quicker. That's the one thing I had heard about it. So that should have created a Choco extension folder, so I'm going to cd into that. And then if I open up Visual Studio Code, then what I need to do is I'm going to create a live share session between my computer and Martin's computer so that he can see the code and edit the code that I have open in my Visual Studio Code window here. And I'm going to do that by clicking this live share button. In order to get this button, you have to have installed the live share extension. So there's a VS live share extension that you can add into Visual Studio Code. And with that in play, if I just click this button, it should start that session, and it'll give me into my clipboard a link that I can then go over to another window that's off screen and send that to Martin, and then he should be able to connect to that. And what we should be able to see is when he joins in, we'll see him as a participant, and this little icon down here will update to having a 1. Now what we could have done is I could have shared that URL publicly and everybody on the stream could have jumped in and started editing the code, but that's just a recipe for disaster. So we're not going to do that. It's just going to be me and Martin that's editing the code. So Kim's saying that Yarn is quicker. Yes, that also makes sure that everyone uses the exact same version of the packages if the Yarn package file is checked in. Okay, is that not what the package lock.json file in npm does as well, Kim? And I have read somewhere nuspec zip file. really, Maurice? I've not heard that one. That's referring to the nupkeg or the new package, right? So they're referring to it as a nuspec zip file. Okay, that's a new one on me. Yes, but that file doesn't. Right, I see what you're saying, Tim. Okay, so when Yarn started, it had that out of the box. I see what you're saying. Okay. Are you having issues connecting, Martin, or?
Yeah, for some reason it wants me to sign in, but I'm already signed in, so I don't know. Okay. But I'll just continue as a read-only guest here.
Okay, fine. So with that,
might be that because I have so many connections open already. So.
Okay, could be. Okay, so we have a Visual Studio Code extension here. So in theory, if I were to hit F5 within this Visual Studio Code window, it would then spin up a extension development host, which would have the new code that I've just added into here. Now, there is no code really in here. I'm going to say accept to that. Yeah, there is no code in here, but it will still spawn the extension development host, and then this is where our code would run. Okay, so this is how we can test it, and we can start testing this out. So for now, I can go ahead and close this one and go back to the one that we're using for creating the code. So what we need then, Martin, is we need this language server thing that you spoke about.
Yeah, we need to create a server, and I didn't mention, but some months ago, I created a blog post on how to create a language server in .NET. And in my example there, it's pretty much same as this, because we're going to create a language server which works on XML documents. In my example, I worked on the CS project files, but here we're going to work on nuspec, but the idea is the same. So if you just follow along there and start creating the server, then you just .NET new console and create a server, and then we're going to add the NuGet packages.
So we're going to .NET new console with a name of, let's call it the nuspec server.
Yeah, okay. That's okay.
And then what you wanted me to do was then to add the OmniSharp extension language server.
Yeah, omit the version number because there's a later version now, so we just get the latest.
So let's copy that. So this is the C# library that does all of the heavy lifting for creating that language server, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that was .NET add to the nuspec server CS proj, and then I've already forgotten the syntax, but it was package, then what's on my clipboard, which is that, and we've got an extra space, I don't think it matters, but let's do that. And then the second package that you had in there was the GUI Labs language XML. So what is this one?
That is a XML parser. Yeah, because basically when you work with a language server and when you parse documents, most of the time the document is not semantically correct. So you want how do I say it? A error tolerant parser, and that one is error tolerant. If you're going to use like XML reader or stuff like that, it's going to blow up on the first error it sees, and then it's hard to examine the whole document.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that is if I remember correctly, that package is created by Kirill Osenko, one of the author, or he's working on the MS Build project,
Gotcha.
MS Build team. So
okay. So the question there in the chat room from Gareth was, so it opens an entire new instance of VS Code. Yes, essentially that's correct. As Stephen said, it's the exact same thing. If you've ever done Visual Studio extension development, then in order to debug that extension, you need to have it running somewhere. So it spawns it into a new instance of Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code in this case, and then the debugger is able to attach to that running process and allow you to step through the code as you're exercising the extension in the other instance of Visual Studio Code. It's really quite clever. It's one of these things you kind of have to do, or at least play with once to see how wonderful it is. The other thing to mention on that note is that if you are, let's say I'm modifying the Chocolatey extension for Visual Studio Code, but I already have that installed, in the extension development host that's spawned, it actually overwrites the installed version of the extension with the one that I'm actually trying to debug and create in the other one. So it takes care of all of that sort of stuff as well. It really is Inception. It very much is. Okay, so we've now got a nuspec server project that has 2 package references to the libraries that we're going to make use of as part of this nuspec server. And what do we need to do now then? So,
yeah, basically what we need to do now is first off, we are going to create a handler for the syncing document changes, because that's fundamental for language server, because you don't have the possibility, or you don't want to read everything from the file system, because then you just be able to react on changes to the document when the file is saved. So basically, having a text document sync handler is fundamental. So that will make sure every changes to the document is synced back to the server. So we always have a fresh copy on the server.
Okay, I see. So what we're talking about there is so let's go back to let's imagine this is my nuspec file. So what we're saying is that initially, when the language server starts up, we're going to take the entire contents of this file and send it over to the server.
Yeah, initially when you open, it's going to send an on open request. Mm-hmm. I open this file, and here's the content of that file.
Gotcha.
I don't even need to read it from the file system, because it has the file content. And then on every changes, and depending on how the server says it wants its changes, either it can get incremental changes, which only then sends parts of the document which changes, or we could ask for full changes. So every single change will trigger that the full document is sent to the server.
Okay. And then at that point, as it's getting changes, we can then have the server run the validation rules on it and then send back when there is a problem. And that's what will generate the red squigglies on our running instance of the document. Is that correct?
Almost. The diagnostics, they are notifications sent from the server to the client. So we can do them whenever we want, but it's often you like to do them when the document changes, you parse it. But you can do it in the background, so you can just respond to the buffer change event and then just kick off some background process and do diagnostics, and then eventually when the diagnostics handler are ready, you just publish the diagnostics back to the client.
Okay. So based on what you've said then, so we're going to need some sort of buffer and sync handler on the server. So should we? Is that something we can grab from the blog post, or?
You can probably grab it from the blog post. Yeah, this buffer manager works great. It's just a wrapper around a concurrent dictionary, which has the file key and then the buffer as the value.
So that was buffermanager.cs, and we can go ahead and paste what I've got on my clipboard. So let's close this a second. So this may be a bit big, a little bit smaller. So concurrent dictionary needs obviously a using statement of some description. So It's thinking using collections.current, concurrent even, and buffer is something
that's
lives...
from the XML library. So, yes, Microsoft Language XML. Yeah, that's correct.
So this has got this concurrent dictionary is where all of our files are going to be stored, and then we've got an update buffer and a get buffer. So that's just throwing stuff into the buffer and then getting it out again. So that seems, even I can understand that so far. So we're doing well. Okay.
Yeah. This is just for simplicity.
So
and then the next one is the sync handler. Mm-hmm. And this is where the interface, the iText document sync handler, I think it implements both the on open and on change and on save and on close. But we are interested in the on open and on change. But we get everything from that interface, so we can just ignore the rest. But
so I should pull this in its entirety and we can modify it.
Yeah, pull that in entirety, yes.
Let's grab this. Back to here. So that was called, what was it called? It was called Text Document Sync Handler. So let's create a new file. Text Document Sync Handler. Mangler. Let's try this again. So let's put this in here. So I noticed something. So this is going to have to come out. That's obviously from the blog post.
3 dots.
So let's start at the top. So iText document sync handler is going to come from OmniSharp.
Protocol server. Yep.
Okay, so that's that one. That will probably pull out a few of those. Document selected, I'm assuming, from the XML parsing.
No, that's from the OmniSharp also.
Okay. Document selector. This, I'm assuming we're going to want to change that to a nuspec.
Yes, nuspec. That's correct.
So that's the ones that we're interested in, and this is just a wild card for all files and folders in the current window or workspace.
Current workspace, yeah.
And then this one's going to come from OmniSharp again. Okay, so we've got that one. Text document sync kind, that's going to come from
OmniSharp.
That one again.
Yeah, and here is what I told you earlier. Here we say what kind of sync kind we want, and for simplicity we're going to use full sync kind. So then we're going to ask the client to always send a full document. Whenever a change occurs, it will send a full document, not incremental changes.
Okay.
It's just for simplicity. In a reword scenario, you probably want to have incremental changes.
Okay. So, so there's more work to be done if we do an incremental change, because but Kirill's library, I remember that it can handle. It has methods for incremental changes on the buffer, so it's straightforward to do it. Yeah, but if you don't have a parser like that, just go with the full and handle the whole document. So I feel I have to respond to this chat message that's just come through that basically is saying, do you only invite red-haired Scandinavians to your stream? So this is obviously Patrick, who was on the stream last week talking about his Spectre CLI library. And yes, so far 100% of my guests on this stream have been red-haired Scandinavians. So we're either going to continue that or it's going to go horribly wrong. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess. The other one was prettier. I am not getting involved in that discussion, Patrick. You can discuss that with Martin off camera. So I'm just going to keep going through these red squigglies to get rid of all, or to include all the usings that we need. So this is just system URI. That's just going to be task. So
task.
And that's going to be link of some description. It was there. Using system.link. String buffer is going to be
XML library.
Okay.
Yes, that one.
And then unit is going
that's from mediator. So it's the embedded mediator. Yes. OmniSharp extension embedded mediator. Yeah. Okay. And then cancellation token.
That's going to be something from system threading. Okay, so
now I think there is some methods missing from the interface. So if you just go up to the interface and then implement all.
let's do implement explicitly
Interface.
or
Just implement interface.
an interface. So that's going to add in some code that's probably got not implemented exceptions. Yes.
Yeah,
so,
you did close just return unit task. Return unit task.
So where are we? Sorry, this is on.
Change the throw new implemented exceptions to just return unit task. Unit.task.
Turn unit task.
Task. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that's going to be the same for all of these ones?
Yeah, that one. And the capability, then you just underscore capability equals capability.
Underscore capability
equals capability.
Oh, I see. So that's just there's a member variable that's just going to be.
Yeah.
Why is that not coming up? Oh, you're going to make me type it? Really? Capability. There we go. Okay. And then registration.
Copy from the other registration. It should go a little bit up. There. Go down. Yeah.
Okay,
there.
This one
Return
here?
you. Yeah. Copy that.
Then replace this one.
Yep.
And then replace
the other one. And then change the type to be the.
Oh, hold on. It didn't work very well. Change the type to be.
The one that it.
Copy this.
Yeah, and then remove the sync kind property.
Okay, so that doesn't exist on that one.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, no, it's just the document selector.
Okay.
And yep, I think that is. So basically now, if you go back to the handle, for example, in this document, go up to the did change text document handle.
Did change, did close, did change. Yep.
Yeah. So basically here what we are doing when a change come in, we take the ID of that or the document path, and then we just update the buffer, create a new string buffer, and then we are logging to the window that updated buffer for document and then the text.
Okay.
So if we could try, if you just go to the program.cs and then copy the last from my blog post.
Yep. So blog post is this one.
Yep.
Let's grab all of that. Copy.
Yep.
And then replace this. Okay. So that's
you probably need to go into the CS proj and tell it that you like to have the latest C language version, because otherwise it won't let you have an async main.
Oh, I see. Okay. So let's just pull these ones in. So these are just some additional usings again. Dependency injection, fine. Okay. Logger factory is
Microsoft extension login.
Okay, and you said in the CS proj I need to change something.
Yeah, you need to add in the first property group, add there a new element called lang version.
Land? Or?
Lang.
Oh, lang, sorry, lang. Lang version.
Yeah, and latest.
Let's do lang version. Latest with a capital L, or does it matter, or?
It doesn't matter, I think.
Okay. So probably
Matthias can tell if that was correct. Matthias,
so
is it correct?
Let's just sort out some formatting while we're phoning a friend on that one. Okay. isn't latest the default value for langvar? I don't know, Kim. Is it?
No, I don't think so. Latest is latest now should be like C#8, or depending on which compiler, what .NET version you're running.
Okay, so Phil's coming back with he doesn't think so either. So, so this program.cs is we're spinning up. So language server is the thing coming from the OmniSharp DLL, and then what we're doing is we're just providing a set of options for instantiating that language server. So we're just getting the standard input and output. We're using a logger factory. I'm assuming that's doing some logging. Minimum log level is set to trace. With services, configure services is okay. So this is where we're passing in our buffer manager that we created. So we're registering that with the dependency injection container that comes out of the box. Whereas before you would have had to spin up Altifac or Simple IOC or something like that. There's now one built into .NET, so we're taking advantage of that, and we're just registering buffer manager as a singleton instance in this code, and then we're providing a handler. So this with handler method must be looking for something of type whatever it was, iText document sync handler, and then we're just passing our text document sync handler for it to do its stuff. So with those things in play, that's it. We're ready to start doing stuff. Or
I think you could just go to the terminal and do .NET build.
Oh, I didn't save that document, so let's save that. So here, where are we? Does it matter? We haven't got a solution file, so let's maybe go into the nuspec server folder, and then in here, there's the CS proj. So if we do .NET build that, let's see what happens, shall we? So it's doing a restore, and then 0 warnings, 0 error. So that means we can ship it, right? That means we're good to go. Is what that means. Okay. So what do we do now?
Now we need to hook this up to the language, or to the VS Code extension.
Oh, hold on.
So
Matthias says lang version equals latest with a lowercase. It didn't.
Oh,
barf.
But it compiled, so
it compiled,
but
ship it. I'm going to change it now because that's my OCD kicking in. So, sorry. So you were saying, so now that we have this language server thing, we're obviously not going to expect people to open Visual Studio Code extension for Chocolatey and then run .NET Run to instantiate the server. So there must be some hookup between the extension and this thing that we've just created. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you remember in the program CS, we are opening the standard input and standard output. So the VS Code extension is going to communicate with the server using standard EO.
Okay.
So with that said, it needs from the VS Code extension also to get hand on the standard input and output.
Okay.
So yeah, if you just go to the extension, and then if you follow my blog post again, I think I have creating the completion handler. You can skip.
Okay, so that completion handler. So just to give a little bit, so what you were doing with this blog post was about going into a CS proj file, adding a package reference, but having the ability for it to automagically complete that package reference by was it running off the NuGet and finding the version numbers and all that sort of stuff automatically?
Yeah. Okay. It was using the NuGet version 3 API to just do autocomplete on the NuGet package, and then once we got the NuGet package, we went and listed all version numbers and then did completion on the version numbers.
So that's the other part of what this language server. So we're going to be using it for diagnostics to provide error message and problems when there's a thing in there. But this is the other side of it where we're talking about completing code based on an understanding of the semantics of the language that's being run. So Martin's obviously taking a slight break there. I'll maybe mute him so that nothing comes through in case. Okay. So while Martin's doing that, I will attempt. This is me now going solo, so this could all go horribly wrong now. It was all going so well. So what I think we need is, going past all this, creating the client. So we have, this is an extension.ts. So that's what we have. So in my Visual Studio Code window, I've now got this extension.ts. So that's the entry. That's the default entry point for a Visual Studio Code extension. So if we were to go and look in my package.json, then this here, this main line here, is the entry point for the extension. So that's the one that will be spun up when you enable the Visual Studio Code extension, right? So that's our entry point. So that's this one here. So as per his blog post, we're going to copy some of this, I think. So let's just bring it over and see what happens. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to replace all of the code in here with that. So let's see what's going on here. JSON RPC, I'm going to say we don't need that because I think that's specific to what he was doing with the completions. Let me just verify that. I'm going to refer to my Blue Peter style one that I made earlier. So let's go over here and have a look. You can't see this because, I mean, you don't need to see behind the scenes. But this is me having a look at the... Oh, we do need that. Okay. So he's got that one in there. So we have all of this stuff. We've got language client options, settings monitor, server option, transport client, and all of that from there. So I suspect what's happening there is we'll need to modify the package.json file to include those additional packages, and then I'll have to do an npm install to bring them into the current execution. So what we're saying here then is let server.exe equal .net. So that's the so the DLL that we have has to be running once we have the Visual Studio Code extension talking to it. It needs to be ran, right? So we're going to use the .NET CLI to run that thing, and then these server options here are the command. So server.exe, and then we need to provide the path to the DLL. Okay. So for simplicity, right now, I'm going to cheat. Okay, that's the only way of saying it. Because that's a question that I have for Martin in terms of how we actually get that DLL shipped with the Visual Studio Code extension to make it work. Now, I don't know the answer to that. So for now, we are going to cheat, and we are going to say, we're going to just give it the full path to where it's been built to. So Choco extension, nuspec server, and then in the bin folder, in the debug folder, and then .NET Core 2.0, and then there's the DLL there. So if I grab that path, and I see that there's a question in the chat room, which I'll get to in a second. So let's take that and put that in there, and then we'll take this. Oh, I wonder if that's those paths around the wrong. Those, is that going to complain? We're going to have to escape those or add them in the other way. Let's do it this way. Add this in here, and then the final one that we need is the name of the DLL. And the name of the DLL was just nuspec server.dll, wasn't it? Which is this one. So if we grab that and paste that into, go away. Go to the end of this line, paste that in there, and then paste that in there. So the question was, so does the .NET runtime have to exist on the machine that executes it, or is it shipped with code? Yep, you'll need to in a path unless you ship a self-contained app, which if you're on Linux will require a runtime dependencies to be installed, then core RT can't come fast enough. All of that's true, yes. So the way that we're going to run this, we're going to take a dependency. We're essentially taking a dependency on the .NET CLI being in place on the machine that this runs on, because the language server that we're creating has to be running somewhere. Now there are, my understanding is that there are multiple ways of doing this language server. Now we've chosen to use C# because that's C#. That's what I write in all day. So why would I write in anything other? But I believe you can write the language server in, for example, Node as well. So you could have all of that running in Node, which you kind of got already all of those dependencies because of the nature of Visual Studio Code. But yeah, we're in .NET land here, so let's just do it in C#. OmniSharp shipped with an embedded version of Mono. That is correct. Yes. That's into the realm. Well, yes, you've kind of pointed out my point there. But it has its own issues. Yes, it does. So let's not even talk about that. So again, the example from his blog post was specifically looking at CS Proj file. So we're going to change that to be a nuspec, and then I believe we're going to want to change this one as well. And I see Martin coming back now, so I'll maybe unmute his microphone so that he can talk again. Hope everything's okay.
Yeah, everything's okay. Yep.
So I'm literally just going through, and I'm doing my very best to explain all of these bits and pieces, but I've resorted to looking at the Blue Peter style one. Here's the one that we did earlier, just to make sure that I'm changing all the things that so I have it open on my other screen, and I'm just stepping through as we're going. So I've said that we need the path to the DLL, the generated DLL that we did as part of the .NET build, and we're going to have the .NET CLI run that thing for us. So the question in the chat room came up is, well, then I need to have the .NET runtime exist on the machine that's this extension is being used in. So the answer to that is yes. By doing this, we're essentially taking a dependency on the .NET CLI. But Matthias pointed out in the chat room that in theory, the OmniSharp extension ships its own version of Mono. So in theory, could we use Mono to do this, to spin it up, rather than take the dependency on .NET? Or is that opening a can of worms that we don't want to speak about?
Or we could ship a self-contained .NET app. Yes,
that was the other thing that was mentioned in the. So yes, in theory, yes. So we could do the entire. So rather than ship a DLL, we could publish that as a self-contained exe and have that run as part of the. And then that led on to the bigger question that I haven't spoke to you about yet, which is what are we going to do? How are we going to ship this DLL, or how are we going to ship this self-contained exe?
If you go and look in the OmniSharp VS Code extension in the package JSON, you see they are using something called runtime depends. I don't know if this is some magic in VS Code or if they have something inside the extension. I haven't looked, but basically, when you install the OmniSharp VS Code extension, it doesn't automatically have the OmniSharp exe. It goes and downloads it on the first time when you start up the extension. So basically, I think that is what you would also like to do here, because they ship per system, because they have one for Linux, one for Mac, and one for Windows, and depending on the client operating system, they go and grab the correct binary for that system.
Okay. So what we're saying is, so what we've got here is kind of the prototypical way of doing it. This is how we can test to see that everything's working, but eventually once we ship it, we're going to have to figure out exactly how we can either embed and then execute the thing that we want to ship.
Yeah, you probably don't want to embed it. You just want to push it to a blob storage and then let the extension download it, bootstrap itself on the first run, for example, just like OmniSharp does it.
So to say that differently, then, so we will this nuspec server project, we will build and generate the thing, and then we're going to put that somewhere. We're going to put that onto Azure Blob Storage. We're going to put that into AWS Blob Storage somewhere, and then in the activation event of the Visual Studio Code extension itself, run off, download that, put it into a well-known location, and then from there be able to run it when we need it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is how one can do it. Just
So
if we want to know exactly how the OmniSharp VS Code extension does it, then we just look at the source code and do it similar way. But if you go there and check in the package JSON file, they are using some fields called runtime depends. I don't know if it's something that VS Code itself supports, or if they have some source code around it.
Okay. So the other question that's come up there, and this kind of crossed my mind as well, is could the nuspec server be a .NET Global tool? And then
of course it could be.
So that's one option. But then, as Jamie is pointing out, that definitely takes a requirement on having the .NET Runtime and SDK installed, because you need that in order to do the .NET tool install. So yeah, that's either way. I think we're going to have an implicit dependency on .NET. So it's kind of how we want to package that up. So that's definitely an option as well.
Yeah. And if you remember, OmniSharp itself, it isn't a .NET Core project, so it's just a full framework. So on Windows, it just works because everybody have some .NET framework version installed, and on Linux and Mac, it ships its own version of the mono runtime. So the problem is solved there.
Okay. So we finish off this, because I think I've made it all right. So we've got, here's the server options. So the server options are what it's going to spin up. So I've passed that the path, hard-coded path to the DLL on the file system. Then we've got some client options, which are kind of a copy of what we've done on the server itself. We said that we're only looking at nuspec files, and it's creating a file system watcher to anything that's a nuspec file. So that's where the change events are going to come from that file system watcher. And then we're instantiating a new language client, passing in the server options and the client options, and then we're starting that thing up. And so that is essentially it from this point of view. But I did notice that there were some red squigglies up here, so I think there's some additions that I need to make to the package.json file for the dependencies.
You need to add two dependencies: the VS Code -r JSON RPC, and then what was the other one called? Was it some
language client?
Yeah,
and then in your example, you've got that as 5.2.1. So let's just stick with that just now. I need I get a colon in there to make that work. And then the other one is VS Code RPC, JSON RPC. And then I'm going to give that the same version number that you specified, which is version 4.0.0. Semicolon. Or not, comma, rather. And then I'm going to need to do an npm install, I'm going to assume, because let's go back up a level in here. I'm going to run npm install because I added those to my package.json file. So those, and then Matthias is saying, until we have a proper linker, we'll likely be better off just requiring the .NET CLI INJ initially. I'm not sure what that last part is referring. Is that a typo, Matthias? Or I'm not sure. Or is that just some leet speak that you young people are using that I don't understand? That's also a possibility. Okay, so the red squiggly. Oh no, that's just a spelling. That's fine. That's not a red squiggly. That's a green squiggly.
Yeah,
that was a typo. Okay, so in theory, we now have a Visual Studio Code extension that will spin up the nuspec server that we have, and then if we were to open a nuspec file, it would take the entire contents of that nuspec file from the client and send it up to the server, and nothing would happen because we haven't actually implemented anything, correct?
You should see in the log the full content that was sent to the server. That will happen.
So we should
because you can spin it up.
So I'm going to hit F5 in. So this is my. Am I in the right one? So I'm at the right level for. Let's maybe close some of these. So I'm at the right level. I've got the Visual Studio Code extension open. So it should know that I'm doing Visual Studio Code development rather than the nuspec server. It will spin up the extension development host. And in the log file, so if I go to View and then go to Terminal, then in here, in something, let's make this a little bit smaller. So in the output window, in here, we should have something.
We don't have it. Yeah, because one thing you forgot in the package JSON. If you close that, yeah, in the package JSON, you need to tell it on what you want to activate it, the activation events.
Yes, because at the minute I've just got this hello world.
Yeah, and so you probably want to add the workspace contains and then the wildcard for the new spec. Activation events and then workspace contains.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see what you're getting at. So right now, this extension is being activated when a command called hello world is triggered. So that's something that we don't have any commands. So the commands would be something like one of these. So if one of these commands are executed, that would activate the extension in the currently running Visual Studio instance. So we're not going to do that. We're instead going to use the workspace contains star dot new spec.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to close that. So what this is saying is if the current workspace contains a file called new spec, activate the extension, and then the whole server will then be spun up, and then at that point things will start to happen. Correct?
Yeah, that should call the activate method that you have in the extension TS
so we
file.
go back to here and just bring that one up. So the extension.cs, here's this activate function. So this activate function will be called, and then all of this stuff that we have, which is spinning above that server and passing in the client options, will happen. Okay?
Yes.
So hit F5 there. And then, so now in here we have a new spec file, so that should have triggered the extension. So now if we go over here, oh, it's still thinking. Still thinking. Now we have, this is the output or the debug from our extension now. So in here, we can see lots of stuff. So this lots of stuff is the communication between the client and the server, correct?
Yeah, and lots of logging on the server side because we have verbose logging.
Okay.
We have trace logging on. So
create attribute file XML. So that's found our test package new spec file.
Yeah, because it sent the on open. If you type something in the new spec there, you can see the on change. I think we log it. Yeah, that's okay. We just go scroll down the log.
Yeah, so did change, and then oh no, we're still
did change.
Oh, so
there's the buffer.
There's the entire buffer getting populated with the original file. So if we scroll down through that, then somewhere in here. So the change event must have happened because it sent it a second time. Okay.
Yeah, because for every character you type.
Yeah. So that's where
more probably send.
So that's where the kind of only sending the changes over would be better in the long terms. So rather than every single key press sending the entire file, it would only send the what's actually changed. So again, but for this example, just to show things working, we're sending the entire file. So let's just see that happen again. So I'm going to just add a space character. Then we see the log jump straight away. So it's sent the entire file over again. Okay, cool. But in our buffer, it's not going to add multiple files into the buffer because it's going to look at the name of that file and find it in the buffer manager and just update that instance in that concurrent dictionary that we had.
That is correct, yes.
Beautiful. Okay. I think I'm almost understanding some of this now. I don't want to speak too soon, but I think I'm getting there, right? Okay, but again, so we're not actually doing anything. So we've sent that file over, but we're not actually doing anything with it yet. So what do we want to do now?
What do you want it to do? You want diagnostics.
So let's maybe just speak about that before we do stuff. So let's go over here and have a look at Chocolatey package validator. This is what I would like it to do, right? So if I go over here, package validator, in this repository, and I go into source, and I look in package validator, and I look in infrastructure app, and I look in rules, then these are a set of rules that are executed every time a nutkeg is sent to chocolatey.org. So before a package can become approved, it has to run through this package validator. So there are things in here around the lines of, for example, description word count maximum. So what it's saying here is that if the description, the string that is the description, is greater than 4,000 characters, it will fail because there's a known higher limit. And so basically that equates to the fact that the description field in the database is set to 4,000, right? Let's not put any other reasons on that. That's what's that's what's there, right? So rather than allowing that to go in and cause problems, it will fail the validation. Okay. Now, I want that kind of things to appear in my Visual Studio Code. So when I'm typing that description, if that becomes greater than 4,000, I want to know about it. Right, and then there are other examples in here, like for example, I do not know what I typed there. Let's try that again. If I go back to here and do a search for template, so there's one here that says nuspec does not contain templated variables. So what that rule is referring to, I'm going to close this feedback hub because I don't really want to do that just now. What this one's saying is that if any of the nuspec elements contain the templated variables, then again, someone hasn't done their due diligence and updated that file. So if we go back to the example over here, then what we're talking about here, I don't have it open anymore. Did I close it?
I think you closed the extension.
I think I closed it. So let's just spin that up again so that I can show that, just so that everyone's clear on what we're doing. So in the sample nuspec that was generated, this is a templated variable. It's fully expected that that is going to be replaced with a version number. And further down, there are other ones for the summary and the description. So if any of those are left like that, the validator will fail and say, you need to replace it. So again, I would like this to light up and say, you've left that in, you need to fix it. So that's what I would like to get to. So, how do I do that?
Yeah, how do you do that? You probably we have the buffer manager, which knows when the buffer changes. So naturally, probably we can have the buffer manager to expose an event that says that when a buffer is updated, then it sends an event with the ID of the document that is updated, for example. And then we have a diagnostics handle which subscribes on that event and then does some checking on the updated buffer and then sends the diagnostics back to the client.
That sounds brilliant to me. I just want to comment on one of the comments that's on the chat window here. So Maurice, absolutely we could do that. So what Maurice is talking about there is that Maurice has submitted a PR into Package Validator, whose sole purpose in that PR is to validate that the URLs that are contained within a nuspec file and or other files within the package don't actually result in a 404. So his PR proves that those URLs are valid. So I think what he's suggesting is that that's a potential rule that we could add into this thing as well. So we could scan the nuspec file looking for URLs, spawn up an HTTP client, make sure that that's a valid URL, and then fail or provide a diagnostic that it's not correct. So we could do something like that as well, I'm imagining.
Yeah. Gary, I am now rejoining this live share session. Do you need to approve it or something, because it's just waiting and waiting and waiting?
I maybe missed something, but I can let me invite participants, invite link. So let me send that to you again just to see if that's going to come through. So let me know if that happens or not.
Yeah.
But I can start. So while that's happening, so what you said is we want an event. So we want to add an event into this buffer manager to announce to people that something has occurred. So document updated event args. That's a class that we're going to need to create, and that's just going to be an event called buffer updated. And then obviously we'll be able to subscribe to that. Okay, so Maurice is saying that currently the PR is only looking at URLs. If I've understood you correctly, Maurice, so right now the language server that we have here is only looking at nuspec files. But there will be nothing to stop us extending that to look at other files within the package as well. So we could have it look at Chocolatey install.ps1 files and Chocolatey uninstall.ps1 files and so on. It looks like Martin's going to take a short break again, so that's fine. So what I forgot to do this last time, but what we need to do now then is we need to switch this on. So we've got Martin. He's still here in spirit, right? So we've got this document updated event args. So we're going to need to create a class. So let's do public class document updated args, and that's going to derive from the base class, which is just event args. And then that's not what I want to do. That's going to derive from the base class that is event args. And then in there, it's going to have a URI called URI, and that's just going to have a getter. I'm assuming that that's going to be the URI to the file itself. And then it's going to have a constructor, which is called document. I would have expected that to give me that name, but never mind. And then the parameters are just going to be URI and URI. And then in that constructor, I'm going to say that URI equals URI. I see some chat messages. Yes, I think you're right, Kim. I need a using statement for system, which is there. Okay. Why is that suddenly? Oh, I see. Okay, there's now two buffers, so we need to fix that. So let's make this using buffer equal Microsoft.language.xml.buffer, so that we're fully thingying that. That should fix those. Okay. So now what we're saying is, so we've now got an event that something could subscribe to. So we need to raise that event when something is changed. So in this update buffer method, we're going to say buffer updated, and we're only going to invoke that if someone's actually subscribed to it. So let's do that. And then that's going to be a new document update event args with the URI of the current document. So is that going to work? I need to know what URI is. So, it's document path. So let's just be consistent with what we've done here. So let's just call that document path. And then I need semicolon. But that's not a document path anymore, that's a URI. So that's going to need to be, I'm going to change that signature a little bit. Add or update. Oh, so that's now going to change up here as well. Okay, so that, the one that we copied from Martin's blog post wasn't quite the same as what we actually want. So this is just a minor tweak to bring all those things in line. Try get value here wants to be a URI too. So document path, that's probably going to annoy me. I'm going to have to change that, sorry. So let's just change this to a URI. I feel better now. So that's going to be a URI, that's going to be a URI, that's going to be a URI, and that's going to be a URI. Okay, so now what we're saying is that buffer manager now has an event, and then in our document sync handler, when that event is raised, we can then start to do stuff. So if we go over here, the diagnostics handler. Okay, so we're going to have a new class. So over here, we're going to have a new class called diagnostics handler. So this is the thing that's going to return Opera URI. Moment, I don't really get what you're saying there, Matthias. Sorry, I didn't get the reference. So this is the thing that's going to return the diagnostic information to have those red squiggly lines appear. Okay, so we're going to call it diagnostic handler, and in here we're going to have a bunch of stuff. So the question is, am I going to write it all out, or am I going to copy and paste from something else? It's not too bad. So let's walk through it. Okay. So let's everyone. Oh, I see what you're saying. Everyone gets a URI. Okay, that's fine. So let's. It's going to need a constructor, and that constructor is going to be of diagnostics handler, and that's going to take in an I language server, which is he's called a router, and then we're going to take in our buffer manager, which is the current dictionary of all of our files that we know about. So buffer manager. Oh, I already had my open and closing. So that's going to obviously need a using statement, which is going to be there. Buffer manager is in the same project, so we don't need an additional one there. So then we're going to have we're going to need a private member variable to do stuff with. So private read only I language server. We're going to call that router, and then we're going to have I don't know how to do that. Private read only buffer manager, and we'll call that. If anyone's got any problems with underscores, take them up with Martin. I personally don't. I don't mind a good underscore in my code. We don't really need that one because we're not going to get to that one yet. We don't need that one. So in here in our constructor, we can then say router is equal to not minus. Router is equal to router. That didn't work at all. Let's try that again. I might actually resort to copying and pasting. And then our buffer manager is going to be equal to our buffer manager. Okay. So then what we want to do is we want to do some stuff. And that stuff is... That's it for the constructor. That's the only thing that we need. So why is this suddenly... why is this... Oh, feel free to nothing wrong with a good underscore. I agree, Gareth. I absolutely agree. Public class, public diagnostics handler, router. Why is it not finding? Have I done this wrong? Outside of class. Oh, have I? Oh, sorry, I have. Feel free to tell me that I'm doing something silly, because let's be honest, it will happen. So let's try that again. Who was that? That was Kim. Thank you very much, Kim. I appreciate it. Okay, so what we want to do in here is we want to find... You're doing... Thanks. We want to have a method that will publish the diagnostic report back to Visual Studio Code. So we're going to create a void here that is going to be publish diagnostics, and then that's going to take a URI. So I see that Martin's coming back, so I'm going to hide the in spirit Martin, and we should get Martin back, and I've unmuted his microphone again, so he's back in the room. So again, hopefully everything's okay.
Yep.
Did I again?
Okay.
So where I've got to is I have updated the buffer manager to include an event that will be raised whenever the buffer gets updated, and I've created a diagnostics handler, and I'm just stepping through the Blue Peter. Here's one I created earlier to start stubbing out the diagnostics, creation of the diagnostics. So that is a buffer. That's going to need an include. So this include here is just going to be for system. This one's going to now take the buffer from the system, so we don't want that. So we're going to want the same buffer that we added in here. So we're going to want to put that in, so it uses the buffer from Kirill's library rather than the system buffer. And then in here, this is where we need to start kind of walking the XML file that we've now, or the nuspec file, the XML file that we're getting from the client. So Kirill's library is going to give us I think I'm right in saying this, it's going to give us an abstract syntax tree representation of that XML file, and we can start doing stuff with it. So the way that we're going to do that is we are going to have a variable called text, and that's going to take from the buffer and call the getText method on the buffer, starting at 0 and then up to buffer.length. So that's the entire text of the XML file. Then we can create a variable called syntax tree, and that's going to be so using Kirill's parser. So we've got parser. That's obviously going to need an include. So parser dot I've lost my dot parse, P-A-R-S, and that's probably, and then we're going to give that the buffer. So that is going to need that one. So syntax tree is in the parser of the buffer. Then var text position equals new text positions. I feel that's going to need something as well. Text positions of the text.
Text position is something I copy pasted from Adam Friedman. He's also involved in the LSP project for C#, and he have a great set of tools which uses this language server protocol for C#, which is used for MS Build project tools.
Okay.
And he also, the text position is a class to map from lines and columns to just a index in the file.
Okay.
Because the Kirill's library uses just an index and an integer, and then LSP wants lines and columns.
Okay. So this text positions is a class that I can steal from somewhere, or
I stole it from Adam's repository, but then I did some slight modifications. So you just steal it from the code that I gave you. So
this is the full-blown. Here's one that we created earlier that I think we had open to the. Not opened it to the right place. So let's go back and open a folder to this one. It's in source. That's what it is. So maybe I would have it. So it's here. Oh, I just put it in the wrong place. Yeah, it's there. Look. Source, nuspec server. So in here, you're saying that there's a text positions class. So this is the class that you borrowed from Adam. You said. Okay, so I'm going to, rather than typing all of that out, I'm going to create a new class called text positions. So I'm assuming that this class is MIT, and I can just borrow that, and it is MIT. So we're keeping the license header, so it's got all the copyright information from where it came from, but because it's MIT, we're able to use it, and this the Visual Studio Code extension for Chocolatey is also released on an MIT, so again, everyone can borrow that and do what they want with it. So that should give us text positions, so that should now know about that, but I'm assuming that you've kept the, it's no longer, let's just put it in the same namespace so that doesn't get confusing. Or is that his namespace? Is that where he has it?
No, I changed the namespace.
You changed it. Okay, so let's just change that so that it's the same, so it doesn't need an extra include. And then diagnostic, then I'm assuming comes from so that one Sharp is the generic list, and then diagnostic is going to come from OmniSharp. Okay, so we've now got a syntax tree that is a representation of the XML file, and then we are starting to create a list of potential problems that have been found in that XML file. So what we want to do is, so let's come back to here. Here we're going to do some stuff, which is to actually find the problems. And then what we're going to do is router.document.publish.diagnostics new publish diagnostic params. And then that's going to take one of those, and then that's going to be URI equals URI. I'm assuming that class we need to maybe create, or is that here already? Diagnostics equals diagnostics. That one. Okay?
Yep.
So that then is going to call the publish diagnostic. So that's the one that sends it back to Visual Studio Code, correct?
Yes.
Oh, I'm on the wrong. I'm looking at yours. There we go. So where does this one get called from then? So that's not an overridden method. So where does that get called from?
No. Now we need to hook this up. So if you go to program.cs.
So program.cs was down here. Yep.
Yeah, and now we have a possibility. So in the on initial first thing we probably want to do, we want to add it as a singleton, the diagnostics handler in the configure services. So
down here we're going to do services.add singleton. So again, that's just adding it into the IOC container. So this is going to be, we called it diagnostics handler. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and then to actually get this resolved or created, we need to get our hands on the services or the service container. Mm-hmm. So we could like example I sent you, we can hook this up in the on initialize set delegate when the language service is initializing. Then we can get our hands on the service provider, so we can then from the service provider we can request both the buffer manager and the diagnostics handler. Then we can hook up the event from the buffer manager to send it to the diagnostics handler.
Okay.
For example.
So
here, if we go here, should I write?
Well, I just wanted to maybe save some time. I was maybe just going to pull the one from the. So everything you spoke about just now is literally on the initialize here. So we could borrow this one and then copy that, and then
you don't need that. Yeah, just that.
So with handler and then space here on initialize. So what that is saying is, why is that complaining?
You don't need the extra semicolon.
So this one here.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're using the onInitialize method and we're saying, get me the services that are part of the language server. So that's what is being added. We're then getting the diagnostic handler and then we are passing that into the I see. Okay, so then we're calling the publish diagnostics and then we're using the buffers get buffer. Okay, I see. Okay. Makes sense.
One way to hook it up. There are probably better ways, but this is it.
What this will do is then it will call that method that we've got in this diagnostic handler. So this is the entry point here, and this is what's returning the diagnostics back. So what we need to do is now call some diagnostics. We need to do something, right? So
we need to do something. So we have some diagnostics to publish. So if you go back to the buffer handler,
the buffer handler,
or the buffer manager. Sorry,
buffer manager.
Yep. So here, when the buffer is updated, we call the event, and then the event will then, because we hooked it up with the program CS, then it will go to the to our diagnostics handler. So
it's in this to do section is where we need to start doing stuff. So the example that I think we'll do, just for the sake of getting something, let's try and generate some diagnostics problems when we have noticed that there are templated variables. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do. This is going to be private. So this is going to be a private. I enumerable. I can never spell enumerable. I enumerable of diagnostic, and that's going to be validate templated variables, and then that's going to require an XML document syntax. So that's the tree.
Yeah, because that's the root of the syntax tree,
which we've got above, and then our text positions is going to be the text positions. So that's so that we can correlate between the two things. So now that we have that, so this is something that we can call now and add into our diagnostics collection up here. So if we go diagnostics.add range and we pass in validate schema, validate templated variables, and into there we're going to pass in the syntax tree that we have, which is syntax tree, and then the text positions. I've called that wrong. I've got a typo here, so text positions should then work. So then that. So that is all we need to do. And that's all we need to do in terms of hooking up the publish diagnostics event that we've now hooked up within the program.cs. So what we need to do in here is figure out whether or not there are any problems, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that I could get wrong in there. So let's maybe just copy this part as well. So over here in our text document handler, let's just find the code that I was, not that one, that's not the one I want, diagnostics handler. So let's pull this one. So what we're saying here, and I'm going to put this into here, is for each node in the syntax tree, descendant, nodes, and self of type XML syntax, right? So what we're saying here is, from that syntax tree, find all of the nodes and its itself of type XML text syntax. So that's essentially saying every element within the nuspec file, correct?
Yes.
And then within those elements, if any of the nodes contains something that is a templated variable, then we are going to return a... It wants me to do something.
Yeah, the diagnostic severity, I think that there's an ambiguity between the Kirill's library.
So let's put that in there so that that doesn't thingy anymore. So this template variables is something that we need to create. So if we remember back on here on the rules, we go back to the rules and we look for templated variables again, then there's this concept of a list of things that are a templated variable. So there's this, if any of those things are found, then it's a template. We can kind of reliably know that it's a templated variable. So if we go back to here, then you have the equivalent of that, which is just a read-only collection of things. So let's go back to here, and then let's just add that up here. So this is our templated variable, templated values. So if any of the XML elements contain __ replace or space _ separated or tag 1, we can reliably know that it's not right and we want it to be replaced. So what we're saying here is, if it doesn't contain any of those things, then just simply go to the next one. If it is there, let's create a range, which is the get range from the node start and end. So that's what's controlling the red squiggly. Is that right?
Yeah, because we want to know where exactly in the document the error is. So we get the range, and that is where this text position, which I copied from Adam Friedman, comes to play. Because we just have an index start and end, but then from a range we get a position which contains a line number and a column number, and also for the start and the end position.
So there's a question from Maurice in the chat group. So the question is, why not keep the same names as in the validator? So what I think he's referring to there is, why don't we name this method the same as this one? So there's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't do that. So what I think you're saying there is, make that the same as there, and then that will require this to be up here as nuspec does not contain templated values requirement. Okay, I've got no problem with that. I think that's a good piece of, because ideally we would just take this rule and put it into this language server. So we might look into doing that as well. So reusing the rules, but they're two completely different paradigms. These rules are looking at it already has knowledge of the entire Chocolatey package, and it can extract files from that Chocolatey package and do various things with it. So what we're actually validating on are two completely different things. So I don't think we can directly use the code within the validator, but I think it does make sense to have the synergy between the names. So absolutely. So with that in place, in theory, I think we're ready to run this. And we should,
if you build it, and then we can try to run it.
Yes, because at the minute, yes, that's a good point. So if I go into here again, nuspec server, and do .NET build of the nuspec CS proj file, because we've got a hard-coded reference to the DLL in the VS Code extension, that's probably something I didn't do. So text document sync handler. Text document sync handler is telling me that there's 2 errors in here. What was that one for? Oh, because when you were away, Martin, the one that we copied from the blog post was a string rather than a URI. So this document path wants a URI now rather than a string. So let's just change that and then change this one as well.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we go back to PowerShell. We'll run that again. Run the build. Okay. So, do we think it's going to work?
No, I think so.
I'm reasonably confident. So let's go ahead and F5 in here. And if this works, the new spec file is already in the workspace, so that will trigger the VS Code extension to be activated. That will then trigger the language server process to be spawned. And then, in theory, we should get some problems returned. So, it's still running up. Still running up. There it goes. And look at that. So we've got red squiggly lines in the new spec file now. And if we look in this problems section, we can then click on these problems to then, in the exact same way that you would get if you've got a build error, we've now got an ability to see those templated variables in the new spec file highlighted that they need to be changed. And if we hover over it, we get some IntelliSense style snippets that say templated value which should be removed. This to me is just awesome, right? This is mind-boggling. It really is. So in theory, if I go into this summary and just say this is a summary, then every keystroke that I did there took the new spec file, sent it back to the server. The server then ran that same validate there's no template variables on that document, and then has updated the diagnostic information to only have 4 values in it now rather than 5, which is just amazing. It's amazing, right? I don't know how else to say that. I really don't. So yeah, that just worked, Martin. So obviously what we'd want to do now, or rather, what I have to do, or I don't know, maybe some willing volunteers from the chat room, maybe Maurice and maybe Stephen, maybe Kim, would be able to go back to here and extend the what do we call it? The diagnostic handler to have additional rules. So we would have multiple of these private methods that are looking at the XML file and the syntax tree and figuring out what needs to be correct. Then all we need to do is add another add range here to then validate, to call that method and have stuff happen. So in theory, there will be nothing to stop us taking all the rules from package validator that are specific to the new spec, and you'll see that there's quite a few of them. And we could add a method here for each one of those rules and publish those diagnostics back to Visual Studio Code, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Challenge accepted, Stephen's saying. Perfect. Love it. I love it. Okay, so in terms of what's left, in terms of what I need to figure out, maybe with some help from you, is I need to figure out how to publish the DLL and have Visual Studio Code extension either download it at the time of activation and figure that out. And then in terms of optimizations, I think I'm going to want to look at only sending the change of the document rather than the entire document. So that's something that I might want to look at as well. Yes. But in terms of what we are set out to achieve here, which was a language server that was communicating with Visual Studio Code and then providing the ability to provide diagnostic information about things that are wrong in that file, I think we've achieved that, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of probably a natural stopping point, and we're coming up on the hour and a half. We're past the hour and a half, so I think we need to draw this to a close. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, or?
That the thing about error-tolerant parsers and not now. In the example that I sent you earlier, I had also the schema validator,
right,
validating against the schema, but that uses the XML reader, and if there you can easily see the benefits of having an error tolerant parser, because then it will blow up, or it will stop at the first error and don't see any other errors after the first error.
So in this example, what Martin's talking about here is in the Blue Peter style one that we did earlier, the Chocolatey nuspec file has a XML schema file that it can be validated against. So in the example, we didn't quite get to this part, but what Martin's implemented in the other version, the version that I'm running here, is he's actually validating the nuspec file against that schema. So what he's referring to there is, if we now come, so in addition, it's got the same problem, so it's got the same templated variables, but if we come down here and we type in XML element called foo, right, then that's going to provide an error as well, because that element doesn't exist in the schema for this nuspec file. So it's immediately saying something's wrong, right? But if we follow up, I think if I do this, this one here, this is where the fault tolerance comes in, right, Martin? So this here, I'm making the XML invalid. I haven't closed off that bar element. So the fault tolerant XML parser that comes from Kirill is handling that for us. If we were to do that manually with just an XML reader and try and do all of that stuff by ourselves, then it would be hard. And that's not something we need to worry about. So what this has done is the only side effect of that is that it's then stopped parsing the XML file. Because before I put that bar in, I had an error on foo. But because I put bar in, it's then stopped the processing of that one, correct?
Yeah, and try put the bar before the tags, for example.
If I put the bar before the tags, if I cut this from here, and so I'm expecting all of those to go away. Oh no, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
because the tags they are from Kirill's error tolerant parser, and the schema validation is from the XML reader. Gotcha.
I see what you're saying. So that's where the benefit of using Kirill's XML parser comes from, rather than the schema validation, which is currently happening with just an XML reader. Right, I remember. Okay, perfect. So there's a question there from Orion Ossos. I'm not even going to try. Is this OSS? This is super useful to be able to surface your own errors and issues. Yes, absolutely. Everything that we've discussed here is open source. So, as a quick recap, Martin put together an example where we are making use of a library over here, which is called the OmniSharp Extensions Language Server. So that's the C# implementation of the language server. So we've created an instance of one of those. And on top of that, we're using a library from GUI Labs by a guy called Kirill. I'm not going to try a second name. I'm terrible at names. That gives us a ability to parse an XML and get an abstract syntax tree from that. And putting those two things together, we have then created a language server that is specifically looking at a nuspec file that is part of Chocolatey. So that nuspec file can then be validated against our own set of rules. So the set of rules, as an example, is that by default you get templated variables in those XML elements, and we want to be able to provide an error that says, well, that's not right. So literally, with the combination of this language server and the parsing that we're doing, we can provide any error messages that we want surfaced in Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, and the project that I worked on, which I sent to you, I just made it public on GitHub, and I sent you the link on the chat. So.
I think I've got it open actually. And where did my mouse go? I've lost my mouse.
if someone wants to go and grab the code and look at the code.
Okay, seriously, my mouse has decided to stop working. Give me 1 second. I've just unplugged my mouse and I've plugged it back in again. There we go. Okay, so on... I don't have it open, so let's copy this from here. Copy. So if you're interested, if you go to Martin's GitHub repository, and this is the nuspec LSP project. So this is essentially what we've been building up within this stream, but this is the final version. Well, not final. This is the prototype version of doing all that stuff. So it's still sending the full document over, I think, Martin, from the client to the server. So it's literally what we've done here. So it's not a ready to go, and it's not ready to go by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think there's still some work to be done, but it's the final output of what we've done here. So there's some other questions here. I'm sure this will be on the Chocolatey VS Code extension at some point. Yes. So the intention is, Stephen, you're correct, is to take this code and port it into the Visual Studio Code extension for Chocolatey. But there's some things I need to figure out how to finalize before I can do that. And then Maurice is being replied to. Currently, the validator has requirements, guidelines, suggestions, and notes. Would there be any differences in the output? So I think what you're referring to there, and if I go back to here, so right now we're getting red squigglies for things that are errors. But in the same way that we saw in one of these files where there was a green squiggly for an error, for a misspelt message, we would be able to provide that as well. And I think that comes from the severity. So when we added the severity down here, we added it with diagnostic severity error. So if we go over here and have a look at what's in that enumeration, then there is warning, information, and hint. So we could translate those requirements, guidelines, suggestions, and notes into the ones that are returned. So I don't know this for a fact, but are there like red, green, yellow, and some other colors? I don't know what these translate to in terms of how it's displayed.
Yeah, is hint blue or green?
I can't remember. But I think the answer to your question
is yellow.
Yeah, I think the answer to your question is yes, Maurice. We can definitely have those shown differently within Visual Studio Code. So the ones that are requirements would be diagnostic severity error, and ones that are, as an example, what's the other one? A guideline. We might make that green, which is the ones that are similar to the spelling mistakes that are being shown in Visual Studio Code. So I think we could definitely do that. Yes. Okay, so I think I'm going to call that for tonight because it's getting a little bit late, and I know it's later for Martin because he's in a different time zone from us, or from me anyway. So if there are, this is your last opportunity to ask any questions in the chat room because I'm going to do my kind of closing speech and then we'll close it out. So feel free to type anything in there, we'll address that. But all I want to say is similar to what I said at the start. If there are this GitHub repository here, which is where I'm doing all I'm kind of curating all of my live streams. If there are any things that you want to see as part of an upcoming stream, or things that you think we could discuss, then feel free to add an issue into this repository, and I will do what I can. This upcoming stream section just kind of details kind of what I'm planning on doing in the upcoming streams. So the next couple of weeks of this stream is going to be around creating a new Visual Studio Code extension. So what we've done today is look at augmenting an existing Visual Studio Code extension with some additional information, i.e. the language server. But I want to take a step back and look at creating a new extension from the beginning and adding in different functionality. So I have a clear idea about one extension that I want to add. So that's going to be that. And then the final one that I've got upcoming there is looking at using Poshbot, which is a PowerShell chatbot that allows you to automate things from within, say, Slack or Microsoft Teams. And I'm in the process of creating a backend that will allow it to happen from Gitter as well. But I want to look at creating a new plugin for Poshbot and have it do stuff. So we'll be looking at that in March. So with that, I don't think there's any questions coming up, just people saying thanks, so that's great. I want to say thank you to Martin for coming on the stream. This has been really good, really useful, and I hope you are still feeling well tomorrow, and I hope that the family is feeling better as well. So with that, I'm going to bring the stream to an end. So hopefully see you here next week, and like I say, if there are any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you very much.